hilarious.
Okay.
I've decided that I will no longer use mines for streaming because it's just horrible how it's going on there. Like you don't even get to watch the video until it's done streaming.
Right. Right.
So
Uh,
Was trying to do
oh
this.
goodness.
Hello. Can you
hello.
hear me?
Hi.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
yes, I can. I've been able to hear everybody. I was trying to do this on the smartphone, and for some reason, I cannot figure out how to give it permission to use the microphone. I click all the buttons that apparently should give it permission.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing this now on the laptop. I was hoping to do it on the smartphone so I could walk downstairs and have an occasional puff on my pipe, but that's all right. I'll do that in a little while.
Okay, now down on, I don't know if it would be on your left-hand side, but it's on my
Yeah.
left-hand side. They got that twin cam there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try it again.
If you
And
click
says,
on it, and
give
you-
it permission. But see, I use the Brave browser, so that might have something to do with it.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
could try using, I think that's the only browser I have on here. Let me see, I might have the Chrome, which I never use. Let's see. Could try using, I'll try cutting and pasting the link.
All right.
You
If
put that
you
in
click on-
live screen, here we go. Copy the link. Yeah, I talked to Panibasa about taking part in the roundtable because you had like an open invitation. He can't do it tonight, but he is interested in talking with you. So I said, well, I'll send you the link to taking part in a couple of the chat rooms, and you can kind of get the vibe and see what's going on and stuff. But he said tonight, he's just not able to do it tonight. And plus, the Second International is not his area of expertise.
His forte.
So,
A lot of people don't like discussing it. You know what I mean? To be honest, I've actually had conversations about it, and like it's just, I don't know what the deal is. Like they just have like this disdain towards it.
well, it's also it's for a lot of people it's history. It's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know what was happening at the turn of the last century. People don't realize. Okay, now this is giving me a chance to. This site can't ask for your permission. This isn't working. I'm just gonna, even with Chrome, I'm just gonna do it on the laptop here.
Okay.
I'll figure it out eventually.
I checked the audio and it sounds like you're coming in pretty good and everything. So
Good.
So-
This probably has a better microphone on it than the smartphone anyway.
and it sounds
Like I said, it was just a convenience thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, it even says go up to the upper left and click
Everything,
this, and
so-
I've got a little control thing up there. Let's say so. It says even with Chrome. So I click on allow microphone, grants guy permission to access. So go up in the upper
It
corner.
sounds like you're coming.
Nothing there. So I join, even without that, and
Mm-hmm.
oh, see, now I'm getting feedback because I get the audio from you guys. Fine, okay. So it says permissions,
Uh-huh.
sound allowed. So according to this, it should work, but it doesn't. So I don't know. I'll have to have my pal Sir Brian take a look at it later. He's my internet guy. He'll figure it out.
That's pretty cool. You got a tech guy. That's awesome as heck.
I do. He's very awesome. He's a really good egg. A really good egg. Has helped me out a lot. He's one of those guys. If you hand him a problem and he gets interested in it, that's all he'll do is work on that problem until it's solved. He's got that touch of autism that all great men have.
Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start talking shit on Mark so that he'll hurry up and get in here.
Okay.
Because the moment I start talking bad about him, he'll pop in and start talking.
Oh, good. So you're going to tell us secrets. And what are you going to tell us about him?
The thing about Mark is there's no real secrets. I mean that's the baddest part about him. Like he's other than being an ex-Chippendale dancer, I guess.
Oh, right. Oh, well, you know, everybody's got to sow their wild oats.
I heard that like wild oats is really good to bathe in.
Yes,
I see.
the mask for the skin.
Indeed. Roger, you join a lot of dots, don't you?
I mean,
Join a lot of dots.
I've just heard that that's what it's about.
Indeed, I'm sure you innocently did hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes up in conversation all the time.
So you're wild
So-
oats.
Chippendale dancer, and that's not getting him in here. We need more.
He says that he can't wear a bow tie because it's not conservative enough. It's too progressive.
Wow. So what does he wear? A cravat?
That's what I was going to say. I bet he wears a cravat.
I just
Person.
that blew me out of the water when he said that it was too progressive. I mean, I've never seen a person who's progressive wear a bow tie.
Well, he was probably teasing you, wasn't he? He
No,
was being
no, Mark.
ironic.
No, Mark doesn't tease nobody. Okay, like that's the,
Oh,
he
he's
was
straight up.
he was straight up about it. So
Interesting.
he got into
But
it.
he's British, Roger.
Yeah.
So
Well,
like saying, oh no, that's too progressive. I mean, it might not mean that literally. There might be a British twist in there
yeah.
to that British satire.
Well,
If you could decode the humour there.
I could say that for anybody else that's British if it wasn't Mark.
Oh, I see.
You know,
Okay.
like
How interesting. Too progressive. A bow tie is too progressive.
yeah.
Imagine when bow ties came out, they were considered kind of avant-garde. The history of ties are very interesting. You know what, ties, they just go around the neck. They don't really tie anything. But originally, the ties were used to tie a man's wig down, his periwig or peruke.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah.
Then the perukin went out of fashion. And there's actually an interesting letter extant. Actually, it was a petition that the Guild of Peruke Makers addressed to the King of France at one time, begging him to do something about all the people not wearing wigs anymore. And I don't know what he was supposed to do. He can't force people to change their neck. It's like, nobody's wearing wigs anymore. My God, what do we do? We've been doing it the last 100 years. My kid only knows how to make wigs.
Okay, so it
How
looks like
interesting. Okay.
looks like we came to the beginning of the hour. I'm gonna do something else new too on this. They have an option to record down here on the side. I'm gonna use that for recording purposes. So when I do the 3, 2, 1, I'll hit that and record as well as do the stream. And we'll get started. Okay, 3, 2, 1, now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the first episode for this season, I guess you would say, of Roger's Real-Time Talkshow event. This is actually the 13th episode. I thought we were going according to seasons and episodes in our last videos, but I guess we weren't. Must have been something else. Today we have Bob Dub with us and Otto Excelsior. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome you guys to the show, and if you want to, we can go around and do a brief introduction, let everybody know you, give a little bit of your background, since this is the first time you've been on this specific show with me. So with that, I'll open it up to you, Bob Dub.
Hey, Roger. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I'm actually really honoured to be on this show. I am from New Zealand. I grew up in Rhodesia. I moved from Rhodesia, which was in civil war. I moved to South Africa and lived in there through the change of government from the colonial government to the self-governing South African state. And then after 10 years of being there, I came to New Zealand, and I've been here for 20 years in this sort of semi-socialist world, I suppose. So yeah, I've been on Minds since 2017, and most of my content revolves around mental health and support and yeah, kind of like making the best out of your life that you can. So yeah, that's me.
There you go. Okay, now with that being said, I'd like to welcome you and pass it on to Otto. See if we can hear a little bit about you, Otto.
Well, thank you, Roger. It's a pleasure to be here. Good to be here with you and Bob. And Well, let's see. What about me? I'm a musician. I am something of an intellectual maverick, and I always like to walk around the table, look at every aspect of things, and I guess I'm generally a commentator on our post-industrial death culture, as somebody used to call it. Just kind of keeping an eye on things and commenting on it. And other than that, I pursue Buddhism. It's probably a very important part of my life right now, and I'm just muddling through samsara, this life, and seeing what's going on. And I think that the whole communist socialist movement, of which the Second International is an important part, is one of the things that I'm prepared to comment upon. So that's hopefully what we'll be doing today.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Otto. Now, today I'm going to do something that I mentioned in the comments earlier. Me and Bob Dub had a discussion concerning roundtables and allowing everybody to have a certain amount of time to speak on their own without being interrupted and stuff. And I told her, that technically, as a chairperson, I do know how to properly run a roundtable, and I just haven't been doing it. And that led on to the conversation, well, maybe someday we should do it to see how well it works out. So I figured today would be a good day to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the topic or talking points. I'll have 2 minutes to talk, and after I'm done with it, that 2 minutes, I'll pass it on to Bob Dub and let her make a comment back to the topic or the talking point that I bring up. And if she is done after that, then Otto can give his feedback on the talking point that I mentioned. And then when that's all said and done, or when Bob Dub makes her comment, I can answer it back, and same with Otto. And when that's done, then we can move on to Bob Dub, where she can bring up a talking point, and we'll do the same with her that we did with me, and vice versa, go around to Otto and so forth. Like I said, it's just something that I think we should give a try and see how it works, because I'm not used to doing that on my live stream, so I figured I would give it a shot. So today our topic is the Second International, like what Otto had mentioned, and I will open it up with the first talking point, which is the Second International. Now, it was formed on July the 14th, 1889, and it lasted from 1889 to 1960. This consisted of two simultaneous Paris meetings, which formed the Second International, in which delegates from 20 countries participated. Now, with that, I also want to bring up the First International as well, which there had seemed to be a split between the syndicalist, or however they pronounce it. I know Otto can say it.
Syndicalist.
Yeah, syndicalist.
Close enough.
They were a part of the First International, but at some point, the movement was pushed out of the Second International for some reason. They lost ties with that, and that was something that seemed to be interesting to me, because I know that from what I've read about them, that kind of goes over into what Bob Dubs mentioned about when it comes to anarchy. So with that, I want to open it up. I believe it's 2 minutes, and I will pass it or ask Bob Dub if she has anything that she wants to comment on about what I just said.
Roger, I think that it's very interesting you mentioned that there were 20 countries. I think that's something that I was really interested in finding out more about. Like, who were the countries and where did this movement of socialism come from originally? Because it didn't just spring out of nowhere. And so the first international was also something that came out of something. So this is a beginning, but it's not quite a beginning. Who are those 20 countries?
Now, for me, I can tell you three of them. No, to be
Mhm.
honest with you, well, four actually, because you got to include Spain into it. They were a big part of it, but there was Spain, there
Mhm.
was England, there was France, and there was Germany. And
Right.
I later on I know that Russia was involved, but I don't know if at that point they were actually a part of it. So if they were, that would make
Mhm.
four of them.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Okay. So it was a big widespread European movement.
yes.
Right. Okay. All right.
Okay, so with that being said, I'll hand it over to you, Otto. Do you have any comments that you want to make, or
I point out to Bob that a lot of this was, I think, and even the foundation of the First International, a lot of this came out of the revolutions of 1848. 1848 was a watershed year in Europe for these movements. And the First International, I think, was more of, and again, I'm no expert on this, but I believe the First International was more of an attempt to get an umbrella kind of an organization going for all the different socialists and anarchists and communists and left-wing people in general. So I get the feeling that that was more of like an umbrella. I think it was technically called the International Working Men's Association. And that gets to the focus these groups had on manual labor and on especially industrial labor. And, we're talking about anarcho-syndicalism, and their whole point is that at that time, the Industrial Revolution scared the hell out of a lot of people, and it just amazed them because suddenly you had this huge amount of these a huge amount of resources was suddenly being released, and all of a sudden they're building things like battleships and huge buildings and monstrous urban sprawls, trains. Things were being transported faster and faster, and the center of this power was seen to be the factories. And the anarcho-syndicalist idea, I think, was basically to seize the control of the means of production by basically saying, look, we're the workers, we're doing all this work. We don't need, foremen and supervisors and owners. We'll just do it ourselves. So I think they were proposing like a general strike because, like I say, at that time, the factories were the center of power, political power, economic power, which are often the same thing. And they felt that if they were in charge of the factories instead of the owners of the factories, then they could remodel society the way they'd like. And this went against Marx's idea. And Marx apparently was a real, let's just say he wasn't easy to get along with. He was very argumentative and very fussy. And his idea was that they should seize control of the state and then use the state against it. I think the anarcho-syndicalists were like, they wanted a more direct path that just let's knock everything down and we'll just run things. Now, of course, today, I think the most important technology isn't so much the factory and the assembly line as the computer.
mm-hmm.
Things like artificial intelligence, things like, search engines, visual searches, information storage and retrieval. I mean, it all comes back to information. So I think if you were, right now, if all of the workers of the world went on strike, well, that would be an issue. But I think if all of the computer workers on the world went on strike, then they really could dictate things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the idea that the anarcho-syndicalists had was that if since they controlled what was at that time the center of all social, economic and political power, then they would hold that power in their hands because they saw that as the way the bourgeoisie, and we're talking bourgeoisie as a technical term. It just doesn't mean people in the middle income. The bourgeoisie are the people who control the means of production and distribution, owners of factories, owners of property, people that make things, people that create things. And so this I think was basically they basically wanted to remove that property from them and control it themselves.
Okay.
So,
Now Mark has come into the room. We
Ah.
we
Hi.
finally got him in here. So
Whoa.
Mark, you want to say a hello to everybody and kind of give a little background for yourself, since this is technically the second season, and we both have good mics.
Sure. Hi, yeah. I'm a Minds user. I provide a lot of support for the Minds platform, voluntary support, and I'm interested in politics, obviously.
Okay, sounds good. Now, Otto had brought up some interesting stuff and with what he was talking about too, and I wanted to also point out too, I did pull up some information on the Anarcho-Syndicalist Movement, because this really relates to a lot of the stuff that Bob Dub talks about. And it's a movement that believes in revolutionary industrial unionism and syndicalism as a method for workers in capitalist society to gain control of an economy and thus control influence in broader society. And I also want to note that the goal of syndicalism is to abolish the wage system, regarding it as wage slavery. And anarcho-syndicalist theory generally focuses on the labor movement. So that's what I was able to pull up from that. So with that, I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob Dub, to bring up your talking points, if you have any or whatever comes to mind.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit, I think, about anarchism, because I would like to say that I talk about anarchism and I identify with anarchism. I identify as being an anarchist. And I think that it's very difficult to talk about anarchism today because of all these sort of quasi-anarchist movements. And it's interesting to me that even though the anarchists were part of you've so confused me with what their name is now, Roger, I can't even say it myself. Anarcho-Syndicalists were part of the first movement, but they dropped out by the second. And it's so interesting that from the very beginning of this anarchistic movement, it was bad-mouthed by the mainstream. And the reason is that what actual anarchism stands for is an absence of rulers. And that triggers people, and they say, oh, everything will go to rack and ruin, because they never stop to listen to what it is instead of the rulers. Instead of the rulers, it's rules. So anarchism is a very, very information-heavy and decentralized movement that seeks for every single person to be their own kingdom, and to not seize control of this or that or manipulate anything outside of just themselves. And by manipulating themselves and being the person that they can be, if everybody does that, it forms this mesh which then forms a post-political society.
Okay. So
yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming into this conversation, with kind of a lot of criticism of a lot of these people who have put forward these ideas, because I see them as really great ideas for 200 years ago, but terribly outdated for being in line with the amount of technology that we have developed since these ideas were first put on the table.
Okay, so with that being said, let's open it up to Otto. Otto, do you have any comments with what Bob Dub has just said?
Well, I will point out that there's anarchism and then there's anarchism. Anarchism is a really big umbrella. I mean, for me, the anarchist influences that I find most congenial is the work of Peter Kropotkin. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with him. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Conquest of Bread, among others. And he was a guy, one of the things that struck me, he pointed out, and I don't know where he got his numbers, but he said, the population of Britain is X. And he said, why number actually work? Now, of course, this is their definition of workers are only people that are producing things. And his idea is that if everybody, instead of only a percentage of the population worked, if everybody worked, it would produce so much that it would suddenly, you would not, basically he was talking about no longer having an economy dependent upon scarcity. He thought that if we just unleashed production full power, there would be more than enough for everyone. And a lot of his ideas basically had to do, another book he wrote and he was very big on was mutualism, mutual aid. And this was he was pushing the idea counter to the social Darwinists who says, dog eat dog. And he was saying, no, actually, if you want to take Darwinism, one of the things that helps people survive is when they cooperate, when they give mutual aid to each other, when they're nice to each other. So he was very, very nice. And then you've got guys like the anarcho-syndicalists. And I mean, anarcho in this case, yes, meant no rulers, but a syndicate is a big trade union. So there would still have been an order organization, and you had to toe the line and run that machine lathe however many hours that the syndicate decided you should work it. They still felt that you needed people to direct them, but they wanted to. They called it self-directing. But of course, certain individuals would always rise to certain positions because humans are naturally hierarchical. There will still be some kind of a hierarchy, and to claim that there isn't one when there is one can lead to a lot of mental confusion. I mean, I think what Bob's talking about for anarchism has to do with a self-directed individual who has no need of rulers. Mm-hmm. My own political philosophy, which changes from moment to moment, I've often called anarcho-monarchism. Which is about the closest you can come. I remember once I was at a party and this guy was trying to say, well, so what's your political beliefs? So I'm like, okay. And then I talked for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and the other one says, so you're basically a moderate. And I'm like, no, it's more complicated. That's how it might work out practically in practical day-to-day application. But no, I do a lot of mental gymnastics before I get to that. But so anarchism is a big word, and there's a lot of things called anarchism that I mean these guys that are running around calling themselves anarchists. I mean, again, my anarchism goes back to Kropotkin, to the old days, and to the idea of the self-directed individual, more of a social thing. And these kids running around today calling themselves anarchists, they're fighting for big corporations, they're taking orders, they're all regimented, and I'm like, that's a weird ass kind of anarchism, man. That's not the kind that I think of, or Bob for that matter. So
Bob,
I would just say that anarchism is a big word.
Bob, what did you take from it? Like, what are you taking from what Otto's just stated with your beliefs? What do you believe? Or go ahead.
I completely agree with you, Otto, that different people achieve different levels. I don't think that necessarily makes a hierarchy. I think that you can have a network with some nodes that are bigger than other nodes and some nodes that interact more with other nodes. I don't know that it needs to be hierarchical in all situations. I believe that you can have networks of hierarchies. So I think that I go back to my original point is that we have such complex concepts now to manipulate that these very basic definitions of the political systems are terribly outdated. That's what I have to say back to you, Otto.
No.
Well, I see where you're coming from there, and when I say hierarchy, again, I don't necessarily mean somebody with 4 stripes on their arm and all this sort of thing. But I think in any small group, like I'm in it's become a band now. It started off with 3 guys getting together to play, and now we've got like 5 people playing, including a drummer. We were looking for a drummer so long. And the thing is, there's no bosses or rulers, but the fact is that one member of the band, Thorkel, he's basically the Kapellmeister. Or as he used to call it, the stage police. He didn't know the term Kapellmeister. You're the Kapellmeister. He starts everything, and like how a first violinist would use his bow, he uses the end of his guitar to like direct people, start songs, end songs, make sure everybody just naturally turns to him and follows what he does. We didn't elect him. It's just that he kind of fell into that role. So I would say that that's part of the band hierarchy. It's not really a hierarchy in as much as, people, he's not like ordering people around, but we all want to do well. So we tend to turn to the person who knows what they're doing. And, that gets me to the idea. I'm just suddenly thinking, in a traditional society, that person would often be an older person too. And that's why through history, we've turned to older people. This is a little off thing, but I talked about how back in like the 18th century, when people wore peruke and wigs, people wore white powdered wigs. That was one of the things about the French Revolution. They were using flour to powder their wigs because people wanted to look older. Clothing was cut to make you look older because older people, gray-haired people, were who you turned to. You gave them respect, and you wanted their wisdom because they knew what they were doing. And again, in older societies, at a time when life expectancy might be 40 years old, somebody who'd made it to like 60 or 70 was somebody that was going to know a lot of stuff that no one else knew about. So there's that factor too. But yeah, I think when I say hierarchy, I don't mean necessarily, and what you're saying about networks and nodes, that is a kind of hierarchy, at least the way I'm using the word. It doesn't have to be an oppressive hierarchy. It's like we were talking about the Celtic. Jean Markel wrote some wonderful books on the Celts. I'm trying to clearly state all my references here for this talk, because we're not just chatting. And Markel talked about the different paradigms that the Celtic peoples and the Latin peoples had when it came to like hierarchies and order and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that you can be hierarchical without being oppressive if it grows up naturally in an organic way. And Markel compared the Celtic idea of kingship with the Roman idea of the res publica, the state. And as we talked about, I did a thing about the Celts. In the Celtic system, at least as described by Markel, you'd have like the village, and you had a king, and the king's power was as far as the king's eye could see, and that was it. And they would work their farm as a not really collective, but they would help each other out. They would cooperate. They were cooperative when it came to raising their cattle, and the king, quote unquote, owned everything. Not really, but it was like, if you were hungry, you just went to the king's house, said, "King, I'm hungry." "Well, sit down, eat." "King, I don't have anything." "Well, come in here. We'll find something." "King, the guys from the next village are trying to steal our cattle." "Well, come on, boys, we got to go." It was almost like a family. And this, of course, this is an idealization. I'm sure it didn't function quite that nicely in actual. If you were living there, it probably wouldn't be that fun. But just the whole basic tenet, as opposed to the Romans. And when the Romans came up into the Celtic areas, a lot of the Celtic, what you'd call the nobility, I guess, were suddenly like, "Hey, these guys collect rent. They have like borders, and like you can like have documents showing that you own something." There was a drive among certain classes of Celtic society that looked favorably on that. Not to mention the wine, which I've talked about before. The Celts were under a lot of pressure. They had the Germans coming in from the east and the north, and they had the Latins coming up from the south, and they couldn't hold out against both. Now, they had trade relations with both, but the thing is, the Germans had beer. Well, the Celts already had beer, but the Romans had wine, and wine was an incredibly important trade item. So there were economic reasons and also drug-related reasons. Wine is not like beer at all, and the going price for an amphora of wine in Celtic countries was one human slave. Now, a human slave would be, usually they say it's the equivalent of buying a brand new car. So an amphora of wine did not cost a brand new car in Rome. So there was a huge profit going on. And the other way too. I'm sure if they were paying a slave for an amphora of wine, they were reselling it at a much higher profit. So you had an economic kind of a draw, as well as the draw of certain segments of the society would be able to create a more powerful hierarchy. And sorry to have gone off like that, but we're talking about the internet.
Yeah.
But I was just answering about hierarchy. So yeah, you can have hierarchy, but it doesn't necessarily it needs to be an oppressive hierarchy.
It's fine. We got enough information to where Mark can actually figure out what we're talking about.
Okay.
So,
Time for Mark to talk. I want to hear it.
he kind of came in at the back end of it, so he got the educational introduction to what we're discussing. So with that, let me first point out to you what we're going to try today, Mark, is try to actually do a round table the way a chairperson is supposed to do it. So what happens is I did my talking point and these guys discussed it. Now Bob Dub opened up hers. Otto did his talking point, as you just heard. And now I turn it over to you. I'll give you about 2 minutes to say what you think about it and everything and what she was discussing. And then she will have 2 minutes to respond to what you said and vice versa. So with that, I'm going to open it up with you and let you say your piece.
Okay. Quite a bit there to think about. Something that strikes me is can you have a true anarchist system? You're always going to have people that are not going to cooperate. You're always going to have people that are going to be somewhat lazy and wish not to be there at all. Another point that comes to mind is I've project managed a lot of, quite a few IT projects in the past. I understand that there needs to be some sort of structure there. There's the issue of the so-called too many cooks in the kitchen idea, where you've got people wanting to push their ideas, and there is no structure there. Therefore, chaos ensues. There was another point. It's just totally disappeared from me.
So if you want to, we can come back to you later and give you some information, more information. So with that, it goes back to Bob Dub. So do you have anything that you want to respond to what these two have said?
I would. That is really interesting what you say, Mark, and I've thought about it a lot. And I think that entering a post-political society is not something that we're going to do in 20 or 50 years. It'll probably take us 300 to 500 years to advance as a species. And so we're not ready for it. But if we don't start, those of us who understand the mechanics of it, if we don't start, then nobody will have anything to follow and to copy. So, yeah, it's kind of like we've got to practice it before we really know what we're doing. That 10 to 20% who don't participate in our system at the moment, we don't know if that's because of our current system. It may be that if we change the system to a different way, there will be ways for that 10 to 20% to begin to participate in limited ways in their communities. You talk about structure and about too many cooks, and that is so important. And that's another thing that we're only going to be able to see as we work through things. We don't know how it's going to work. We've had thousands of years of these top-heavy systems which have told the people how to behave. But one really interesting thing that's happened as a result of our sport is that we've developed a Mexican wave where people can coordinate themselves to rise up and sit down again in a perfectly coordinated thing where information flows from person to person around the stadium in an extremely complicated communication system. So we've already done the Mexican wave in a stadium. What if we did that in a community? What if we changed our structure? Anyway, yeah, there we go. That's what I got right now.
Okay, so do you want to respond to that, Mark?
Yeah. Just to come back to that. I can see that it's going to take a long time for such a system to function or to work. But there's the issue of resources. At the moment, irrelevant on what resources we're talking about, there is always a limitation of resources. May that be food, may that be energy, may that be whatever. And whilst there is a limitation of resources, there's always going to be competition. And competition is not necessarily bad. Competition can be extremely healthy. Innovation, new products being come to market, new concepts being driven. So yeah, competition is healthy in most of the time. Once they all the time. But I don't know, this strikes me as a sort of, I don't know, Star Trek style utopian or dystopian, depending on your point of view, concept. And I don't know, in some ways it could be good, and in other ways it could be extremely dangerous.
Okay, so now since we've got his response, I want to have Otto bring up his talking point. For you got 2 minutes to kind of go over something that you have as a talking point. It could be from something that was just discussed or something that you've brought to the table.
Well, I wanted to mention a couple things that struck me. One thing is back to talking about hierarchies. I don't think it's the question, at least for me, my own personal approach to this sort of thing, doesn't have to do with whether there's a hierarchy or not. Like I'm saying, I think people generally will slip into certain roles in certain situations, and these are not permanent roles. They shift from moment to moment, time to time, situation to situation. But for me, the importance is that any hierarchy be non-coercive. To me, it's all about coerciveness, and that was one of the things that I found very interesting about anarchism is that at least some forms of anarchism have this basic non-coercive, I mean, again, the non-coercive element to them. I mean, whether you're talking about the intellectual anarchism of the self-directed individual, no gods, no kings kind of thing, or anything else. So it's one of those things where we want to keep that in mind. And Bob, you were talking about changing the structure of the society in order to cause the society to change. Maybe I'm mistaken in that, and yet I tend to view it as the structure changes as society itself changes. And this is done through changing situations. Like Mark was talking about, we have the issue of a limitation of resources. That means there's going to be competition. And there's no reason why an anarchistic society wouldn't compete. That's the anarcho-capitalist. Again, there's a lot of anarchism out there. So-called right anarchists think people would choose to compete more often than to cooperate. Left anarchists, you could say, that people would choose to cooperate more often rather than compete. It should be in your own hands. Nobody should be coercing you to cooperate. Get on that machine lathe right now, or whatever. And it's like I said before, we talk about capitalism as if that in and of itself was the totality of a way to organize a society, or communism. But as I've said, in natural life, we find elements of all these things. If I go and I sell my labor, which I do, and in return I'm given a wage, then I'm engaging in capitalism, as a proletarian. But when I come home, I hand my money to my wife, and the two of us use the money to buy food together. She has, it's my old joke, I don't know how much money I have until I put my pants on in the morning and see what's left in my pocket. And I have gotten to the store and reached in and gone, oh, well, my wife got in my pants this morning, and not the fun way like you'd like, but instead, like, my money's all gone. So, and that's communism. That's complete sharing. So we all have, like we share with our friends. I have friends. Sometimes when I'm going to band practice, I'll call and say, hey, anyone want anything to eat? I'll stop and I'll buy hamburgers for everybody. And sometimes another member of the band does that, and that's the sharing part. And yet everybody in the band we all engage in the capitalist system in as much as we work for wages. And so it's not so clear cut. You can't, if you tried to live just as a capitalist, and I guess there are people that do this, I'd be coming home and giving my wife this account, and we'd be keeping, well, you spent that much, and this is my money, and this is your, I don't live like that. I don't know people, I don't know anyone that does. If they did, I don't think they'd be very happy at home. But so yeah, I think that there's a lot of nuance here, and people are going to be engaging in a lot of different behaviors. And again, for me, the central thing is that no one is coercing anyone. I think people will naturally be either helping or competing as the situation calls for. And again, getting back to what Mark was saying about scarcity, about a lack of resources, this is a central element of all of these discussions. It has to do with allocation of resources, because if there's only so much, then that means some people are going to get less and some people are going to get more. And we, as a society, we try to mitigate that. I was talking about this the other day about how communities would take care of the indigent, the elderly, the people that simply can't work anymore. And this was all done through, at one time, the parish. The parish did all that stuff. This is when being a member of the church was integral to being a part of the community. As Professor Dutton points out, at one point in Britain, 98% of people attended church. And whatever you want us to think about religion, this was also, remember, religio means a binding together. This was a social thing. Everything was all part and parcel. And although you can talk about how oppressive it was, the fact is that since it was part of the culture, the people involved in it did not feel oppressed. And that really, if you think about it, is the only way you can determine what coercion is. It's a completely subjective thing. And as we all know, if a close friend of mine says, get your ass going, that's just fine. But if a stranger says, or a drill instructor or something, if you're in the military, get your ass going, that's a different kind of coercion. So it varies. So yeah, I think what I'm saying is that it is a nuanced question. But I do think that the scarcity is a big part of how these systems are derived.
Okay, so with all of that said, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you to see if you wanted to comment back to anything that Otto had just brought up.
So my brain's a bit today. It's been a busy day. I'm thinking. Sure, there's going to be lack of resources, and there's going to be those who win and those who lose. I'm thinking on sort of community aspect. Especially when it comes to religion at the moment. In the UK, there is a real decline in Christian and the church going, even though arguably there's an increase in other faiths, Islam being the major concept. More and more people are working more and more people are working from home. More and more people are having less and less interactions with each other. So yeah, especially since the COVID pandemic, there's been a lack of, things like office.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think he got froze up. I think he froze
Sorry,
up. Yeah, he froze up a little bit. Repeat that last part you said.
Okay. There's a lack of. There's been a lack of. There's been a moving from the sort of office culture to individual working hubs, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for. It's becoming much more harder of course, we've got new technologies such as these voice over IP things, but that's is removing an element of is still removing an element of interaction. As an example, I can't actually, even though I can see through people, I can't actually, I don't know, share a cup of coffee with you.
Right.
Um, I can't make you a coffee, share with you. That's an example. So yeah, there is, I don't know, there's, I would say there's good ideas and bad ideas with these sort of with this concept, but I don't know. I'm quite skeptical.
So, with all that, is there anything you would like to say back to him, Otto?
Oh, well, I think it's a you bring up a good point about the increased isolation of people with the new work from home. And of course, when they did the lockdowns and stuff, that kind of accelerated that. Although even before then, that has been an increasing factor. I knew a couple of people who, even before the lockdowns, had begun working from home. And after the lockdowns, a lot of people did through the lockdowns did so, and then they suddenly realized, why should I go back to work? And that does fragment us a little bit because, like you say, we can talk to each other like right now on Skype, but like you say, I can't make a pot of coffee and say, hey, who wants a cuppa?
Mm.
It is a great way to exchange information and ideas, and I've actually and Bob knows this. I've talked before about comparing people's texting and messages back and forth to the great correspondences that people used to have back in the 20th and 19th century, where you would have like, well, Voltaire, whatever else you think about him, he was a hell of a letter writer. We have thousands of letters. He was in touch with all these other philosophers and stuff. This was a way people stayed in touch, and now we're doing the same thing, except we're doing it in real time, and we can chat back and forth. And yes, I know there is a certain amount of where are you, oh blah blah, but there's also a great deal of intellectual interchange this way happening at a much greater pace. So a lot of it, I think, is not trying to make the technology do more than it can do. It can augment our world a great deal, but it can't replace it. And I think people are realizing that more and more. I think people are learning. I mean, this whole internet thing, it's all pretty new, and it hasn't really been here very long. When you look at the thousands of years of human history, we're still getting our feet under us with all this stuff. So I think people are learning more and more to let the internet and all of the things that it's unleashing on us, and the new technologies like AI and all this stuff. I think people are learning how to use this properly, to use it skillfully, as we'd say in Buddhism, to use it to augment our lives rather than try to replace them. Because that road leads to it's a cliche, but it's also true. I know people like this. The guy who's in his 30s or 40s, living in his parents' basement, who spends 10 hours a day on the internet. And yeah, that's a meme, but it also is that's what happens when you try to live entirely online. So yeah, that isolation is going to be one of the things that is changing our society in some ways, but I think we're also overcoming it in a lot of ways too. We're finding new ways to be human, no matter what our circumstances.
Mm.
Yeah, you haven't talked so much. You haven't talked enough. Oh, well, yeah, the thing about, again, like it gets kind of back to what I was saying about anarchism being a big umbrella. There are anarcho individualists who basically say, your right to swing that frying pan stops where my nose begins. And that, here I am, the kingdom of me, and there you are, the People's Republic of your name. And we're just completely autonomous individuals with no one having even the slightest bit of control everywhere else, all the way through the anarcho-syndicalists that you're talking about. And of course, the word syndicate means, it's from the French, meaning a labor union. And their idea was one big union. And again, like I was saying before, that would give them control over what was the powerhouse of society at the time, industrial production. And thus they could dictate society's form. So, but that would require rules. To run a factory, you've got to have very strict rules. You need shop foremen. You need, you're running machine lathes, especially, you think of a factory in the 19th, early 20th century, that has very dangerous places, and they're not all that safe today. And then you get anarchists that have other ideas about this. So, yeah, some of them have rules. Some of them have very strict rules. There are anarcho-communists. There's the anarcho-primitivists. They're kind of very interesting. So yeah, there's, and that also kind of points to that people do sort of need rules, and rules can either be imposed from above, or they can grow up organically as a way people find is best to work together. And maybe, I think part of it is we don't always use the word rules for that. It's like I was saying about playing in the band. We fell into, and in every band I've been in, you fall into certain roles. One guy's going to be the Kapellmeister, more or less. Somebody else is going to probably be coming up with a lot of the lyrics, might be a good lyricist. I think in an ideal situation, it allows people to rise or sink to their level. And, and again, maybe level isn't a good word, because again, that brings in hierarchical connotations. Maybe it's just finding a place where you're comfortable. I'm very comfortable where I am in life, even though a lot of people could point to me and say, well, you're not a professional, you're not doing this, you're not doing anything with your college. And it's like, yeah, well, I might work this silly little job, but I love what I do. And, I don't care about the prestige that goes with it. I was in the store the other day and I was talking to somebody about what I do, and you could just see their face just change, like, oh, he dresses in a costume and he's a performer. And I'm like, I don't care. I love it. And I've gotten that reaction. So yeah, I think people will if they're comfortable enough and in a relaxed enough environment, they're gonna, so that's kind of rules. But yeah, there are a lot of anarchists out there that have very strict rules, and you must do this and this and this, or you're not a proper anarchist. And the anarchist council will kick you out. Hey, we got somebody else here. But that was basically what I was going to say.
All right. So, Bob Dub, do you have anything that you would like to comment on with what Otto has mentioned?
Yeah, I would actually. I think it's really interesting what you say there about anarchy and everything, and I would like to say that.
Somebody's here.
Guys?
Yeah, I'm here.
Somebody's in our.
No, it's in the background of Otto's thing.
No, it's not me. There's something
It's
here
not.
called
It's Naroki 5 has joined our
Naroki.
conversation.
Hello,
Yeah.
Naroki.
Yeah, that's not me. It's all very quiet here.
Okay.
It's just me and wifey sitting in. Now, if you hear any burps or any other rude sounds, that's my wife. That's not me.
Okay.
That's
So rude. Okay, so my point is that if you are talking about any movement that has anarcho in its name, do not be fooled into thinking that those are anarchists. Those are not anarchists. Anarchists are anarchists. If you break anarchy and you put something else on it, you're no longer dealing with anarchy. So that name is a lie. So that's terribly important to just realize that just because somebody says he's an anarchist doesn't actually mean he is. That's important.
It's an important
To
rule.
scarcity, sorry?
That's an important rule.
It's a terribly important rule. Okay. Scarcity. My I totally agree that resources are hugely important and that one group of people should not dominate or control resources and deny them to another group of people. However, having said that, Elon Musk was a severely abused and bullied little boy who grew up in a hugely dysfunctional environment, went to a foreign country with $50 in his pocket, and now owns or controls more resources than any other human in history. So if you want resources, and if you want to use those resources for the good of mankind, even severe childhood abuse will not stand in your way.
Okay, so what would you like to say about that, Otto? That's pretty potent, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I will point out too, and building on that, when you're talking about Elon, an individual, any individual, controlling these vast resources, this is something that can lead to things that you could classify as oppression, although of course that's always in the eye of the beholder. The oppressor has a different idea about it than the oppressed, let us say. But it also is the way great accomplishments are made. This gets back to the idea of, history. Is history, as the Marxists would say, nothing more than forces, or is history the result of individuals? The great man theory, comes the time, comes the man, which is a kind of a combination of that. So would European history have been the same if there had not been, for example, Napoleon I or Oliver Cromwell? I'm not going to want that.
Julius Caesar.
Caesar is another one. Yes. At the same time, there are aspects of history that are completely impersonal. But the fact is that because Elon or any other person can control vast resources, that means that they can use those resources to do things that otherwise would not happen.
Rules.
That's true. But Elon is, and again, I don't go on about him much, and I'm not impressed with someone just because they're a trillionaire. However, I did see a video one day of a rocket ship landing on its own jet after it had flown. I have been waiting to see that since I was 10 years old. Elon Musk provided me with an image of something that NASA should have done 40 years ago.
Yeah.
NASA has become a joke after the possible moon landings. I'm open to debate about that. But certainly today, when they went to NASA and said we wanted to go back to the moon, NASA said we can't. We don't have the technology to do that. What the hell happened to it? And I think it's very interesting, and I can find the quote. He said, well, we can't go to the moon. However, we have made the public aware of the importance of Arab contributions to astronomy. And really, isn't that what NASA is all about? It's like, no, you're supposed to get us to other planets. You're not an educational institution. You're supposed to be building rockets and exploring the solar system. So yeah, this control of resources by one person, it's a very, very two-edged sword. This is where all the great things happen. This is also where all the horrible things happen. And it gets back to the energies are agnostic. You have a lot of energy, and it can go either way. But the energy itself is not evil. The control of the resources itself is not evil. It's how it is used. This is actually part of the third position political philosophy, which I find myself more and more in a third position, where you realize these things are tools. We were talking about capitalism, communism, that capitalism is a tool. You don't organize your whole society around capitalism, but it is a great way to create wealth and to, provide goods and services. You just can't let it be in charge. The same thing with socialism or communism or whatever you want to call it. It's good to mitigate the scarcity of resources for some people. It is good for the community to help each other. And really, it's just a nationwide extension of the parish, where if there was extra, you would take care of the indigent, the elderly. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can't make that the basis of the whole thing. So again, it's nuanced. I think part of our problem is we're painting with too broad a brush sometimes about these things. And whereas I like to sometimes say, nothing is simple. Nothing really is simple. And of course, that doesn't get talked about a lot because you can't make big, wide statements about things. And
Actually,
when you say, like I was saying about that political talk, when it's like, I talk for 45 minutes, it's, well, you're moderate. I'm like, it's more complicated than that. And it is. Everything's complicated.
No, when it comes to complication, that brings us to Mark, okay? Now, Mark can complicate it.
A complicated man.
Yes. Now, Mark, it's your turn to talk. Bring in some talking points that you have. If it's something you brought into the meeting or just something you got from the meeting, go for it.
Okay, I've got nothing fresh, but just to, I didn't want to pick on Elon Musk, so to speak, but I've got mixed feelings about him. Sure, he's aided in the creation of various technologies, but a lot of that money has come from the state, may that be the UK, EU, US state. As an example, the electronic vehicle concepts, there's getting lots of subsidies from the states. So I'm just thinking that he's not pushing the idea of true capitalism. He's not basing his market off on true capitalism. He's receiving lots of money from the state, and the state is now saying, or has recently been saying, that more and more people must get electronic vehicles, even though there is a pushback from the public in a lot of areas within this. So there's a real sort of serious issue in relation to putting somebody on a pedestal and based upon force. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So,
Yeah, totally.
Now, with that, we're gonna go around the room, and after you is me. So I've got some pretty cool stuff to say because I always have cool stuff to say to Mark.
You do.
No, especially with Mark. I love talking to this guy. He is something else. Now, earlier we had a conversation, and I wanted to correct myself on something that me and you had been discussing, and we were talking about socialism in England, and I said that we were talking about how the Whigs were replaced and stuff like that, and I agreed with the whole thing about the Whigs being replaced by the Labour Party, but I found out, and I need to correct myself on that conversation, that the Whigs were actually replaced by the Liberal Party, which you guys actually did have a Liberal Party. But later on, the Liberal Party was taken over by the SDF and the Labour Party. So
SDP, Social Democratic Party. You said SDF.
Well, that's what they were originally called.
Back in 1984, I think, too. The party before.
Mm-hmm. But I found all of that out, and I do want to say that I did do the check on that, and with the Labour Party, the SDF at the time, along with the Independent Labour Party and the Fabian Society and several trade union leaders joined together in February of 1900 to form the Labour Representative Committee, which would be the LRC, or however the initials come out. But that's what I found out about it. Now with Elon Musk, I don't personally have any say for or against the guy. The one thing that I can say is he's a mover. When he says he's going to do something, he does it, and that's something that I can't deny. So I had no idea on his history either. I thought he came from the family that made the perfume. You know what I mean? And I never had any respect for any of the Musk perfumes and stuff, because that stuff's horrible. That's the cheap stuff you get at the dollar store. So with that, I am going to hand it back to you and see if you have anything to say, and if you don't have anything to say about what I just said, then we'll let Bob Dub talk on what you discussed.
Nothing comes to mind at the moment. Actually, one thing. You say Elon Musk is a mover and shaker. He comes up with a lot of ideas, but when it comes to market, he has failed a lot within the sort of implementation of the infrastructure. We've seen this with the Starlink project. We've seen this with Tesla, where there's a big waiting queues. People are waiting months, if not years, for products that they've already ordered. So yeah, he may be an ideas person, but when it comes to the practicalities, that's another story altogether.
Okay, let's do Elon. Right. So Elon is working a system. He's not implementing a new system. He has learned how to tap the existing system. Why I brought him up was as an example of somebody who has used resources, collected resources. These projects that he's involved in, he tried to be the guy that joined in with the other guys, and he did that whole thing with the PayPal system, and they just cut him out. And he went away and sat in his bedroom for 6 months and decided what he should do with his life when they stabbed their knives in him. And he went back to his friend after 6 months and he said, stuff them all, I'm going to go to Mars. And that's what he's doing. So he's a man living a life that's been full of abuse and betrayal. He's not perfect. He's a really flawed man, like many people on the stage today. But as an example of somebody who knows how to manipulate resources, there he's a good example. And I think we need rules, because I think he's one of a kind. And I think that after he leaves, the next person who comes along will possibly not have his attitude. And I want to speak a little bit about attitude. Otto, earlier you said that you thought that I thought that we could change society by changing the structure of society, but I don't think that at all. I think that if we change our attitude towards society, we will want to change the structure of society. So I think that it comes all back to personal responsibility and attitude. And Mark, you said we're sitting here and we're interacting, but we can't make each other a cup of coffee. And it made me think about Jesus and how on the night before Jesus was going to be killed, what he did with his friends was eat a meal and ask his friends to remember him by eating together. So I think that what you're bringing up here about as we enter this age where we are changing and we are physically isolating and mentally collecting, connecting. We could remember that Jesus had anticipated some of these ideas of loneliness and misery that we would face. So I think that some of these things are eternal questions, and we're just people, and we're kicking the can down the road. The thing that I'd like to bring up quickly is another thing you sort of had planned for tonight, Roger, which was class structure. I watched a movie last night on Annie Besant. Besant? I don't know how you say that. She's a very interesting woman. It struck me that her life is as much of a disaster as my life. And I thought that was very interesting. It made me very irritated that she spent her entire life feeling that the upper classes were against the lower classes, because that's so strange to me that the lower classes perceive what the upper classes to be doing as to be outside of their interests. For me, I look at, say, somebody like King Charles, when he was a Prince Charles. In fact, all the working royals, they're working royals. They're working royals. They justify the obscene amount of resources that their family has dominated by trying to do good things for the community. Now, if we were thinking like Elon Musk, we would be asking ourselves, how can we capitalize on that? Here is this extraordinarily wealthy, well-connected man who is living a life of service to his community. And he's doing really dumb things by talking about things that nobody cares about. But what if we were to actually somehow do what Elon did and learn how to tap the system so that the resources flowed into grassroots community projects? Because I really believe that that could happen. But I don't think that it happens while the people are sitting around being resentful of the upper classes. I think it happens when the lower classes understand that there's this resource of these rich people that can be utilized and does not need to be opposed. So I offer that into the conversation.
Indeed. I'm just thinking, sure, there's resources available, but we see a lot of discussion around various, I don't know how we'd like to call it, cosmetic attributes at the moment in religions, in relation to religions, skin color, sexual orientation, and we see very little discussion about class systems. I mean, I'm a UK citizen, and in this country there is a historical point of class system. So the working class, the middle class, upper class concepts, and having access to those resources is a major issue. Sure, it's possible for those that have got those that are middle upper class having access to those resources, but what about the sort of man done to pit concept? Has the working class individual got the ability to access those resources?
That is very good. Now, I'm going to open that up to Otto. It's his turn to comment.
Well, you know, I am thinking a couple of things struck me, and for some reason I was reminded, and again, this is another third position philosophy, but of G.K. Chesterton's ideas, and Hilaire Belloc came up with something called distributionism, which again is like harnessing the power of capitalism for smaller families, smaller groups. And indeed, this was the normal thing for a lot of human history. Here in the United States, most towns had a lot of small businesses that catered to things. But it was through government interference, and this gets back to Elon milking the government udder of all this tax money for things like Tesla, something I don't approve of personally, but which at the same time I can understand exactly why they're going into it. They're trying to create a car probably, 10 or 20 years before we really have the technology to do it properly, because people want their science fiction stuff now. They want their Star Trek now. And we're not ready. I would love the Star Trek universe. We are not ready for the United Federation of Planets right now. I wish to the gods we were, but it is not the case. So, we have to work with the planet that we're living on right now. So, but yeah, and also before I forget, thinking about class and, again, what Bob was saying about, the class struggle is something that people were educated into. This is the peasant revolts. There's always been class resentment, and what I used to call the class wrestle. Not so much the classes at war, not class war where you're trying to destroy each other, but a certain give and take. If I'm an owner of a factory, I don't want to pay you any more than I have to. If you're a worker, you don't want to get paid any less than you want to. So the two of us are going to be at conflict over that, but we can wrestle over it. A little bit of industrial action, a few strike breakers, this, that, it modifies itself. But when you get big forces where it turns into, it goes from like negotiating and maybe a strike here and there, or a lockout, and then you get things like the Pennsylvania Coal War, which I don't know if you guys were talking, Mark was talking about miners. There was a group, and I named my cat after her, the Molly Maguires, which I regard as an Irish American working man's rights organization, but which the state of Pennsylvania declared to be a terrorist organization. They didn't have that designation at the time, but basically, this is something that we were educated into, and in part, I think it had to do with the again, it gets back to the Industrial Revolution. This caused a huge disconnect in our society in many ways. And getting back to those resources and wealth, suddenly wealth was being concentrated in individual hands like it never had before. So some people got this money and they became like Gould or J.P. Morgan. Others got this kind of money and they became Friedrich Engels. People don't remember much that Engels, the co-author of some of the Communist Manifesto, and a man that supported Marx for his entire life, was himself a very wealthy capitalist. To be fair, he tried to make his factories as nice as possible, paid top wages, a very Keynesian kind of a guy in a lot of ways. But this causes a disconnect, because suddenly traditionally these resources would be in the hands of government, which at that time, as Bob points out, these were the so-called upper classes. You had the aristocracy who ran things, but at the same time they took certain risks. One of the things I enjoy is naval history. And there's a guy, I'll give him a little plug, Drakenfell, who has this great naval history channel, and he did wonderful series of videos on Lord Nelson and on the Battle of Trafalgar at the end. And when you read the descriptions, and he's going from like diaries and accounts of the time, this was basically on a hunk of wood on a gunnery platform, and you're shooting as much hot shot, grape shot, fire shot. They had fireballs and stuff shooting at each other. And there was no way to protect yourself from that. These officers, including Nelson, this is how he got killed, would dress up with big ostrich plumes, gold braid. They made themselves targets. And he was reading from one account of a man who was there, talking about how all the men were ordered to lay down on the deck to avoid the shot, but not the officers. and the officers would stride back and forth with their big golden hats, inviting shots so as to save the sailors from that, and because the sailors were needed to run the damn ship. It was a noblesse oblige, I think was the term. So both sides, if you want to say sides, all social classes had their duties, and they had their responsibilities to each other. And of course, this is a descendant of feudalism, in which there were always very strong reciprocal relations between, like, say, a serf and a lord. People going about serfs, but the fact is, serf was a big step up from the Roman slave farms that existed before then. We talk about agribusiness today. That was the Roman Empire. They had these huge slave farms in Europe, and then when everything broke down, they're just like homes like we have. There's no walls, there's no defense, big windows and stuff. So instead of being a slave, and the male slaves were kept separate from the female slaves, you were a serf. You could marry your wife, and you had to work 1 day a week on the Lord's farm, and you had 6 days to yourself, except for Sundays when you go to church. So there were very strong reciprocal kind of ties. And then in the Elizabethan times, we got into bastard feudalism. This is when money came into use. And I remember, this is something I mentioned, somebody in the Elizabethan era was trying to get a grant of arms because everybody wanted to be a gentleman, and this was a very wealthy magnate, and he'd bought this old estate and this and that, and the heralds rejected his claim to a grant of arms, probably because he didn't bribe them enough. But the reason they gave was that his gate was not greasy, because he was not giving food to the poor constantly. And I don't want to go on too long, but this reminds me again of something, and I've talked to you about this, Bob. Henry VIII. Henry VIII was, a Renaissance prince. He was in direct competition socially with Francis I. He wanted to make, his palace was none such. And one of the things he did was he had food cooking in his kitchens 24 hours a day. I mean, it takes a lot. We don't realize this. We have microwaves. If you're going to cook a meal, if the king says, I want to eat, that's going to take hours. You've got to slaughter an animal. You've got to clean it, butcher it, cook it. It takes a long time. I remember my mother and my grandmother getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to cook us Thanksgiving dinner, because they had a bird. I remember my grandmother with her skinny little arm reaching in and pulling all the guts out of the turkey and saying, well, here, this is the gizzard, we're going to do that. And here's the liver, we're going to make pate, and we're going to do this. And, everything. It takes a long time. So he had food cooking constantly. There was always a meal prepared. So whenever he felt like it, he'd say, bring me a meal. And they'd carry it right into him. And this really impressed his guest. All that food that he didn't eat, they gave it away. There were hundreds, probably thousands of people hanging out around the palace that they were just fed off of this. And this was just handed to them. I mean, I'm sure the cooks and their families got the first dibs, but after that, so there was always a kind of a runoff, trickle down, if you like, to quote Ronald Reagan. This was lost with bastard feudalism. Suddenly it was all about money. I mean, if you read like Henry VIII, he had like a such and such retainer, a barber or something like that. His pay was so many pitchers of wine a day, so many loaves of bread, so and so much meat. Food was what you paid people in, because if you don't have food, you'll die. I mean, hell, even the Roman soldiers were paid in salt. But and with the money coming in, that's when relationships changed. So yeah, I've been going on for a bit though. I'm sure I'm over my 2 minutes, so I better. Sorry, I just go on.
That's what you got to say about that, Mark. It's still your turn.
Okay, it's funny you brought up Reagan. I was just thinking of Margaret Thatcher's "There is no such thing as society" speech. Yeah, and anyway, I'm just thinking, we're looking at this from a very sort of westernized concept. I'm thinking of the sort of Indian concept, where you've got a class system. We've got is it the Kafirs that don't have any sort of real ability to do anything. And you've got things like the Chinese society, especially now, the Sesame sort of thing, where you've got people at the top, people that are party members that have got a lot of ability, and then you've got arguably a population that, like the Uyghurs, which is at the bottom run of the class system, to have very little control, very little say, and arguably abused.
Excellent.
And Russia as well, yeah.
Since I'm the girl, thank you. You're a gentleman, Roger. Okay, so I am on minds.com. That is my home. I have recently also started a project led by Minds Gaming on Mint.me, which is a very exciting and interesting new little place that I'm starting. I have a YouTube channel. I also put some videos on Roger's YouTube channel, and bit on Rumble, bit on Facebook, a bit on Odyssey, some on BitChute here and there. Yeah, so I float around. So yeah, that's me. Thanks, Roger.
You are welcome. I ended up talking all that stuff on the OBS when my mic on the OBS was muted out. So even though it probably is on like the chat and everything, but I don't know if what I said before was on the stream, which I apologize to everybody. But I have it recorded down here. I'm hitting record on the actual Skype, so we'll have the recording of it that I'll be able to edit out and make it look good. With that being said, Mark Edworthy, you want to say something about yourself?
Okay, I'm not as prolific as Bob Dodd. I'm really only on minds.com, so minds.com/Medworthy. I spend a large amount of time aiding in sort of supporting users, community members on Minds, and diagnosing and resolving support requests, and there is a lot of very interesting conversations. Minds.com Medworthy.
Okay, and how about you, Otto?
Well, first I want to say, if you're going to be going on to Mark about socialism in England, start with John Ball. And I'll tell you how far back these ideas go. But that being said, I'm on minds.com. You can find me there. I've got some videography that's been posted on Bob Dove's channel. If you go to her channel and look at her playlists, you'll find some of my videos there. I talk mostly about Buddhism. but also current events. And I did a couple of very interesting videos of the Celts, again from in part from the perspective of Jean-Marc Ayre. Well, that's a warning. Not everybody likes his scholarship. Otherwise, I also have a Buddhist website, navakavada.org. That's Navadakavada. It's spelled just like it sounds. No, Navakavada. But anyway, I don't really do a whole lot with that site right now. I hope to do more. But yeah, minds.com is where I generally you can find me. That's my main hangout.
Okay, yeah, and we will definitely do that. And I hope that you do come back next week, because if you're interested in coming onto the show, you are always welcome, Otto. You're one of the greatest people I've actually been able to sit down and do these streams with. I mean,
I'm glad to be able to join the little group. Yeah, I don't, as all other things being equal, I shouldn't have any trouble being here.
okay. And same thing goes for you too, Naroki 5. Sorry you couldn't stay long and everything, but we are glad that you stopped in and you said hi. With that being said, I guess we could go ahead and end the stream. I actually had my mic off mute this time, so I know people actually did hear me. So.
Hooray!
Yay!
So with that being said,